All right. So first, welcome everyone. And again, my name is Jason Manning, and I'm a teacher of Big History at Oceanside High School in Oceanside, Long Island in New York. And I've been teaching Big History for going on 10 years now and working with the OER project for about the same amount of time. Um, Tonight's session, we're going to talk about contextualization and some of the great resources and tools that you can find on the OER project website. And we also have a session that's going to allow you some opportunity to hit a few breakout rooms and take a look at some of the resources and put them into action. And then we'll come back and talk about each session as we go. Just a quick agenda and some objectives for this evening. You can see the agenda there on the left. We're going through our overview and icebreaker now. We're going to talk a little bit about the approach to contextualization. Again, when we hit the breakout rooms, we're going to practice and look at some of the resources that can be found on the OER project website. We're going to talk about tips and how to engage with other teachers in what is called the OER project community, which supports anything that you're doing here. And we'll wrap up after we go through all of that. We definitely want to learn the OER approach to contextualization and the corresponding tools that are on the website. We want to discuss and share the interventions and support that students' understanding of contextualization. And we want to explore various implementations of the contextualization tool in your classroom. Just some quick kind of norms. Please unmute or raise your hand at any time during this presentation. This isn't a lecture. I think the best ones really are just generated discussions. So I encourage you to ask questions. Megan Suits, who is also with the OER team, will be moderating the chat, and she will certainly stop me if I need to answer any questions, or you can send those questions in the chat. As always, in a Zoom session with adults, cameras is preferred so we can see who's talking. And the most important norm here, and that I can stress, is your personal needs come first. If there's any questions that you have, even if it's off topic, and we can be a resource for you, please do not hesitate. This is your time, and we want to make it as valuable as possible. Okay. So getting back to the recommendations, I will now, looking at some of the excellent descriptions that you guys put up, I think mine might be maybe a little easy, on the easy side. I'm going to go with a movie, and I'll model good instruction by starting as I open up the chat here. But mine was, a man of integrity must become corrupt to find ultimate freedom. So if anybody would like to unmute and tell me what that is, and then maybe you can share yours. We don't have to do everyone's, but we'll kind of do a couple here just to warm up. Not John Wick. Is that because I've stumped the group? Kathy, no, I'm sorry. It wasn't John Wick, but the other line.
No, I'm the John Wick person.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yours wasn't John Wick. I'm the John Wick person.
I got you. Thank you for that. Nice to see you, Kathy. No, so mine was Shawshank Redemption. No? Bad description? A man of integrity must become corrupt to find ultimate freedom. I was trying to take a play on that great line where he, traveled through the sewer system to come out clean on the other side. Does anybody else want to unmute and share theirs, and we'll take a guess at it?
I was just going to add, there was another Shawshank. An accountant goes to jail, makes a friend, frames the warden, and goes to the beach. Very succinct.
Yeah, there you go. That was pretty good. Let me pick a couple more. Being young. See, I don't know most of these.
I'm guessing the woman describes the joy of being young and going out dancing. That's got to be Dancing Queen, right? For a song.
We need, who was that, Melody to tell us? Oh no, that was a woman goes back to her home where her spouse leaves her.
That God, it
Yep.
is from Gloria.
Gloria.
I'm Melody.
Hey.
The woman gets her house back, and then her spouse leaves her. Is Gone with the Wind.
Oh, good job, Melanie. That was good. There's one that I knew right away. I want to see if I can find it again. Oh, Patrick. It's got to be Groundhog Day, right?
Yep.
An accountant goes to jail. That was pretty good. We'll throw in a bonus question for you. Megan and myself met for a few minutes before the presentation started, and another colleague of ours threw this example out, and neither one of us knew what they were talking about. Now, we will reveal the answer that was told to us, and maybe someone can help us why this is. So, does anybody have a clue as to a young rural woman and an urban gentleman board a train with only their hopes and dreams? Again, Megan and I were completely stumped.
This is worth
Uh,
5 extra credit points.
Five. Did you hear that? 5 extra credit points.
5.
Can you
Is
give
that
us the
Don't Stop
genre?
Believing?
Can you give us the
Is
genre or
that
the
Don't
media?
Stop It? Is
It-
that
We
Don't
were
Stop
told it's a
Believing?
movie.
Oh, movie.
We were told it's a movie.
Is it something related to, I think is it Eternal Sunshine or something like that with Jim Carrey, Kate
Eternal
Winslet?
Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
No, and
No.
Megan, I'm gonna go out on a limb and think that our colleague might have been mistaken here.
I'm just saying this is what's in my notes.
So we were told that this is Batman. Can't be, right?
Can anybody make it make sense?
Which Batman?
Exactly. It's not Dark Knight.
I don't remember any Batman where they get on a train.
Neither do I. And I said that to Megan. I'm a Batman fan. Yep. Megan, I think we got it. I think we were misled there. So other than do nows and maybe some icebreaker kickoffs, I guarantee that the tools and resources that we use are a little bit better, because unless anybody can get back to us by the end of this about why that's Batman. I mean, I was even trying to think maybe they're confusing that with Superman, like a rural woman from, where was he from? But I don't even remember a Superman movie where they get on a train. Anyway, let's talk about contextualization and some of the tools that you can find on the OER Project website. I actually want to begin this conversation by talking a little bit about the challenges before we get in and talk about the tools and the approach on the OER Project website. I always like to identify like some of the challenges we have as teachers. And I like I said, I teach big history at the 9th grade level in Oceanside, but I also wear different hats, teaching American history classes and an elective post-World War II American history. And I find contextualization to be one of the hardest things to do in the classroom. Even in the two hats that I wear in my instruction, big history is very much a big history perspective where you're really looking at the entire forest. And then the senior class I teach, post World War II American history, it's very much a specific time period. And regardless of how I'm scale shifting, whether it's the parachute view or truffle hunting for the small details, kids really have a trouble with contextualization. They simply just don't know enough history to really make sense of the events. So it's a challenging task in any classroom that you're in. So I want to start by recognizing those challenges and maybe just hear a couple voices of, you know, what you find challenging in the classroom about contextualization. Why do students have such a tough time with it? If anybody else wants to share like their struggles with teaching it, I think it would be a good way to get started. So is there anybody that would like to speak to that?
I will. I can't seem to find the little hand raising icon thing, so I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Please just unmute and you can go.
One of the things I always tell my kids is when we're talking about any historical event is they need to take off their 21st century goggles, because they tend to look at things from that perspective. Like we look back on whatever event happened and it's, you know, not sensitive to this or not sensitive to that. But I always have to tell them, you need to stop and think about what the mindset of those people was at that time, what was going on. So I get that struggle. And it's like today, this was one of the things that frustrated me. I gave them a question. We went over vocabulary, but I gave them a vocabulary assignment that kind of took that vocabulary a little farther. And we were talking about the Mayan civilization, or not the Mayan, the Aztec civilization, and how they had an absolute monarchy. And so after learning the vocabulary term of absolute monarchy, and then I asked them, I said, why is an absolute monarchy a potentially dangerous form of government? And you know, all they go for is the very surface level stuff. They can't understand that what kinds of decisions somebody in that position might make. It's all about, oh, well, that means they have ultimate power. Okay, but what does that mean? What does that mean for the citizens of that civilization? What does that mean for that individual who's making those decisions? What kind of decisions could potentially be a dangerous situation for the citizens if that leader makes those kinds of decisions? You know, so I have to kind of really drag it out of them. And sometimes they still don't even understand it. And so that's kind of frustrating.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I would argue contextualization is, you know, a next level skill, and it's hard to get to that next level skill when you're struggling and frustrated with some of the basics like vocabulary and, you know, some of the, you know, terms that are needed before you can even begin to tackle aspects of contextualization. Any other frustrations that anyone can speak to? Like why do kids struggle so much with this particular task?
Hi, my name is Shana. I actually struggle less with historical concepts and more with current events. I recently kind of got into current events with my students, and many of them are like, well, the only time I ever watch the news is with my grandparents when they're over, or things like that. So when trying to approach like historical pieces, I can put it at their grade level and I can kind of give them the vocabulary that they need to understand those things. But in terms of current events and the literacy skills they need to understand like political or even like war-based current events, there's so many moving pieces nowadays that they're kind of unaware of, that makes that kind of frustrating for me. And I kind of had to sit there with a couple of them and be like, hey, let's decipher this article together, because I have some things that I can help you and fill you in on the blanks for. But otherwise, if they just kind of like approached it, they kind of just lacked kind of the modern day, I guess, kind of understanding of what's going on in the world.
Right. They ask you a question about current events. How far back do you have to go to in your explanation to help them make sense of something that's going on today? It's a great point. What about any successes? Anyone out there that has success with a particular strategy that can speak to contextualization? Anybody do anything that kind of helps build to these problems? Because that would be something nice that we can compare and also discuss as we show you the tools that we offer.
Yeah, I mean, I think both sides, I mean, it can be difficult on both sides. One of the things, we're finishing up the slave trade, and the amount of kids that don't know that most slaves more slaves went to Brazil than they actually did to the Caribbean. So showing them today like a moving map from, I can't think off the top of my head, but it was really cool, like interactive for them to be able to stop. They could do it at 0.5 times the speed, one time 1.5, and being able to actually click on one of the ships and see basically in terms of who was on that ship and basically how many were on that ship. And but to they're all colored in terms of the different countries. So when they saw how many greens, that was Portugal, went down into Brazil, versus obviously the Caribbean. It was pretty fascinating for them to see that, because when
Right.
they have like one of our school kind of midterm things coming up, when they see a chart that will say that number, you know, we focus a lot on the Caribbean, but we don't focus enough on, say, Brazil um, and Portugal. And it was really interesting for them to be able to interact and kind of do it on their own pace.
Right.
So that was yeah, that was a success, I would say.
Thank you for sharing that, Patrick. And what I'm hearing is it was that level of kind of scaffolding, aid, and support with the material that helped the kids build to what the building the context to what it was that you were ultimately trying to teach them by showing them those graphs and the color coded maps. Like that level of aid is really what helped get you to reach your objectives with what you were trying to do with the students.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice segue into the approach to contextualization here with the resources that we're going to share with you. So if you think about what we were talking about in this discussion, we have kind of like the four elements that we wanted to put together in resources and what would be needed for to really help a kid understand the contextualization. So yes, that like when question, you know, the event that you're going to center, the event that you're going to kind of target and focus on, what else is happening at that time? What was happening right before this? And then one of the things that the resource is really going to help you do is kind of focus into those immediate events, but then really zoom out and say, well, what was happening 100 years before this happened, and why does that play an important role in what it is that we're studying? The second is just where, what is happening locally, regionally, globally, what's going on in the world. We were sharing it's difficult for kids to even understand current events. The current events that are going on right now, having an understanding of what's, the global problems of what's going on in the world certainly play a big part at what's happening here at home. Do the kids really have that sense? The World History Project on OER has three ways of really pulling a similar through line through all the courses, and it's called frames in history. What was happening through each of these frames, and those three frames are the ones listed right to the right of that. What was being produced and distributed, what was trade like at the time, how were people connected, what were the networks around the world, and then how did people organize themselves into communities. No matter what era of history that you're teaching, you can connect those eras by organizing your lesson plans into the one of those three frames or all three of the frames, and then trace those trace those frames throughout history. And also the attitudes and values. How has the way people viewed the event changed over time? And that identifies one of the problems that we recognize in the beginning. It's very hard to kids to see things, not in the present terms, like what is happening now. How do we evaluate events in the past and avoid that that presentism? So what we're going to show you next, and I think Megan is going to put it into a chat and organize some breakout rooms, is we're going to actually show you one of the resources and tools that we use. And what we're going to ask you to do is in the first breakout session is we really just want you to analyze and break down this tool. Have a conversation with your group about just like the visual aid and how this can be used to organize and supplement something that you're looking at in the classroom. Just to give you an idea of the rest of the evening is we'll make it a short breakout room so you guys have an opportunity to discuss this and how you might use it. We'll come back and debrief it, and then we'll take a look at this same tool with an actual example off of the OER website. And I think I saw something quick come up in the chat. It is going to be the Mansa Musa lesson that we're going to use for this contextualization tool. So let me just turn it over to Megan briefly, because I believe she is going to put the link in the chat for you to open this up. And then once you're in the breakout room, again, the directions is, how would you use this? Evaluate the tool, kind of talk about the pros and cons, maybe something that you would want added to it or how you would use it. And after the breakout room, just kind of ask one person to just speak briefly. We'll go around quickly to the groups and just kind of share what it is that you were reflecting on as you looked at this tool. All right, the tool is in the discussion. Megan also put the questions also, so you have access to the Google Doc. And then I believe you'll be assigned to a breakout room in a second.
It's like an old, or no, I'm sorry, the chat is empty. Could you please post it again? I'm really sorry.
Yep.
Thank you.
Megan, how many breakout rooms were there ultimately?
There were 10.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So it looks like everybody's back. All right, so that was the first document and tool that can be used with contextualization. That tool will kind of really show its value in the next breakout room when you have some documents that you can look at and an actual event to put there. But let's just break down the resource itself. We have 10 breakout rooms, and obviously we're not going to go through all 10, but really would appreciate if 2 or 3 groups would like to speak to how this can be used with your students.
Well, we kind of just went through the questions, and we a lot of it was self-explanatory, but we kind of got cut off when we ran out of time. But we liked how we could use the cards that OER gives us. I'm assuming I didn't see those yet, but you said we'll see them in the next breakout session. And just the visual of the funnel was it's actually giving the kids the visualization that you're looking at something broader, and then you're going down and picking out a smaller piece to put it all together. Okay.
Thank you for that.
My group, we looked at it specifically in the context of our specific content areas, the classes we taught. I teach government, and talked about how it'd be a useful resource when attempting to contextualize current events, particularly current events in foreign countries, because oftentimes students don't really have much of an understanding as to why things are going on in other nations. Like, for example, with the current conflict in Israel, there's a lot of contextualization to be done regarding that particular current event before students can really understand why that's important, why the US thinks that's important, and why our government thinks that's important.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Let me see if another group can kind of speak to the second question. Aside from images, what kind of documents can you use to help students understand the skill of contextualization?
In breakout room number one, we were definitely talking about using a ton of primary sources here, and being able to hear from people that don't typically find their way into textbooks, and being able to kind of see the worldview of these people, which then is going to really impact how they kind of acted and saw their world. So we thought that was going to be pretty important there. And then kind of even with that leading us right into that third question, which is the controversy in teaching our students that these things that happened in the past, we're not necessarily accepting them, but we're kind of seeing it through the eyes of the people who lived it.
Thanks, Jim. And always good to see you. Yeah, and Jim's point, really speaks to that fourth, important bullet about the attitudes and values of the time. And, the really only way to do that is to provide the students with primary sources. Not necessarily a question that we have to dive into right now unless someone has an immediate reaction, but is there anything missing? Is there anything that worksheet doesn't do that needs to be added, or something that would help students even further?
Great. Wow. Breakout group 9. We kind of discussed that, and I understand that it's a broad template to apply to anything you want, but the way that it's written for sure kind of gives the impression that, or not the impression, but you kind of need to know the answer before you can write it down to figure out the answer. Like, on the broad section, does it represent a long-term underlying cause or contributing factor? If we're talking about Mansa Musa or the Mongol Empire and their broad impact, they need to already know that history before I teach it to them in history class to be able to answer that adequately, or at least it feels that way. Whether that's the case or not, it feels that way even to an adult, so as might find that very daunting.
Right, that's well said. Then let's take that and let's see, how we put this all together, and see now with the other components what that worksheet looks like with an actual lesson attached to it. So in this particular breakout room, you're going to have that resource, but now you're going to have where it says now you can break up the cards. So why don't we, Megan, make this an 8-minute instead of a 5, so that way you can really go through and kind of get the feel of how the lesson would break down, where you would put the cards as far as where they would be in the cone in your organizing sheet. And same thing, let's really dive into how this can help students, things that need to be added, kind of like the steps in the process along the way, your own metacognition. What were you thinking as you were doing it? And then we'll talk about it on the other side. Again, this one will be a little bit more extended because now we really want you to dive in and kind of feel the lesson a little bit more. All right. So again, what you're going to see in the chat is your next material. Let me just open up the chat here. And then Megan is also going to put you into another breakout room. All right, there it is, the contextualization for Mansa Musa. And we will see you back in about 8 minutes. All right, now that you've seen the contextualization tool, and you have a lesson that goes along with it. Let's discuss a little bit about like new insights, something that you were talking about in your group. Again, how you can use this with your students, what you think it does well. You can even add something that you wish it had. But let's dive into this one a little bit. The lesson on Mansa Musa.
So I'm not really going to answer the things you want us to
No,
answer,
no problem.
but because we were confused, we didn't see
Okay.
anything that we thought looked like cards. We weren't really sure what we were supposed to be looking at in terms of what was linked in the source. But we were also talking about how this, like the funnel and like the broad context to the narrow context, is going to be confusing to kids when they don't understand what context is in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So to us trying to figure out how to put it together in 8 minutes when we didn't have time to look at most of those things, and we're very confused ourselves about what we were doing, who teach contextualization. So we need some assistance.
Was the third slide on the link that was provided the contextualization Mansa Musa event cards?
There were no cards.
If you weren't logged,
we found them on the OER website. So, but I think Megan did put them in there.
Oh.
I think Megan did put them in there.
We only had a student version of what we were looking at, so I don't know if that made the difference in terms of these cards that you guys kept referring to and everything. Like,
yep.
We saw excerpts of things, but then it had the attached tool with the funnel and things at the bottom of a lot of it. But I'm like, we were very confused because we couldn't see anything other than student version to see cards.
You have to be logged in.
You had to be logged into the account.
That would be important information before we started doing that particular breakout room then.
Here, let me, one of the groups that was logged in and had the opportunity to take a look at that, if you want to speak to that, let me see if I can just make a quick pivot, and I will share my screen again and then put those cards. I have two
Kathy
screens
and John
going.
both have hands raised.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, this is kind of maybe going at the modification or something like this, but one of the things that we kind of came up in our group was, if there was, and maybe this is going to Shannon, and I think Jacob talked about earlier, is, Kathy said when she teaches causation, Alphonse, the kids get it when they understand Alphonse, right? And I was wondering, could there be a little Alphonse story around contextualization that really kind of like, this is what we're talking about when we talk about contextualization? Does that make sense?
It does. And if
I know it's kind of just went sideways on this whole thing.
No, it's not going sideways at all. Just for a little context for someone who might not know what John is referring to, when we teach causation in OER, we have a resource that the kids just become to know as Alphonse the Camel. And the story of Alphonse the Camel really lays out long-term, intermediate, and then short-term causes for what ultimately breaks the camel's back when his mean and exploitive owner throws this last straw. But what the story does really well is it helps the students understand that Alphonse is born with a back defect, and Alphonse is also stubborn, and he likes to show off, and he's been walking up and down this mountain. So there's so much there, and the kids really do understand causation, and it really does become like just an action verb in class when kids go, "Oh, Alphonse." And you just pull it out in class. And that's an excellent tie-in here, because you're really taking two skills and two different lessons, and you're really putting them together. And that would be a nice way of not only marrying the content of OER, but also strengthening some of the skills that they've already learned.
That was because I was in with John, and that was what we're talking about, is because I always start my year off. I open up with Alphonse and bring in the called causation thing. I spend an entire class period with my students, and we fill my whiteboard with the short term, the intermediate term, and the long term events that can influence. And the kids are always amazed that all these different ideas that they start to come up with as they start feeding off of each other's ideas. And so John and I were saying, how wouldn't it be awesome, especially like if you're modifying it, to try and drive it home for the kids, to have a similar type of thing, to put it in a perspective that they could understand for contextualization. Because without hesitation, throughout my school year, once I've started with Alphonse, and kids are struggling to make connections with causation or anything else, I'll say, okay, think Alphonse. This is an Alphonse moment. And it's not a trigger for them. So if we have something like that for contextualization, that could tremendously help them kind of, and it brings them back to the moment to think about
it. I want to explore this a little bit, and I want to ask this question to that group or anybody in the chat. Can this image become what you're looking for if this was introduced early in the year?
My group, actually, one of the things that we discussed was having kids working in groups and that, and at one point we talked about having just a big, like maybe laminated funnel just pinned on the pinned on a poster board somewhere in the classroom, that at the start, at some point each unit we would do the cards. They would have the students break into groups and sort the cards on their own, then come back to a class. Each group would pin a card onto the big funnel, or write on the big funnel, and we discuss why we put events in broad or narrow context, whether or not they might be more suited elsewhere. Use that as a sort of class activity and a visual aid that be present throughout the unit.
Yeah, and again, just to explain, like these cards here can be cut out, laminated, and then I envision. I love the visual of that, what you just explained, Sean. Thank you for sharing. It's like I can see the lesson develop right now in my head. You're handing kids different cards. They can go up as individuals, they can go up as groups, and they place it, with a little bit of justification as to why they placed it here. And I'll just kind of zoom out a little bit and show you the teacher material for this, of where, the broad context, the zoomed out context, and then the narrow context should belong. But yeah, I love that. And that's what I was getting at, where Alphonse becomes this causation tool that you can carry the thread throughout the year and just trigger kids by saying Alphonse. This can certainly be a visual, that's laminated permanently into the room, and then you can constantly be referring to it, for the kids to come back to when you're trying to set the stage for whatever it is that you're that you're studying. While I have the slideshow off the tab for a second, I also wanted to show you this resource here. Before you begin contextualization and you're diving into content, there is a do now, a hook lesson into contextualization, and this one uses images, and it certainly reinforces that idea of a narrow view and then zooming out. And if you look at this image, I'm sure you can, create a story or ask certain questions about what is going on here. What are some context clues? Anybody want to take a quick stab at it? Create a quick story of something that might be happening here.
She's at a basketball game, and someone she cares about just scored the game-winning goal.
Okay. Why did you say basketball game? Just out of curiosity.
It looks like they're indoors, and it looks like they're in some bleachers or something.
Okay. Excellent use of some context clues there.
Yeah, there's also, she seems to be holding a set of Chelia pom-poms.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Here, not with adults, where you guys know, like I would probe kids, like what would you want to happen now? And hopefully kids say they would want to zoom out a little bit. And then if you zoom out, you start to see things take a little bit more focus. So many of the things that we were hearing were accurate. Well, at least we think, right? Could be many things still, but I heard they were probably indoors. It does look like that. Certainly looks like some type of bleacher seating, which could indicate a basketball game. And with the exception of someone who is familiar with this on the OER Project website, does anybody want to take a stab at where, if I zoomed out one more time, the context of this picture? It's a tough one.
This one next week, so I'm not going to say anything.
Thanks, I appreciate that. But it is a good one. And here's the full picture, a great, great photo in sports history.
Oh, so it is sports.
Yes. Where is the... Oh, I have the, I'm sorry, that's the student version. Let me get to the teacher version. Nope, Mansa Musa. Nope, feedback. Oh, I didn't have it open, but that it will be after our next breakout room. See, that's what you call a little bit of a teaser there. And I promise I will have that up for you after our next breakout room, because the last part of this is the contextualization feedback form. And this one,
I think that those pictures are really great to help get kids kind of connected. You know?
Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. All right, you don't have to wait for the breakout room. No, you do. You do. Right, Megan, am I on the wrong thing? I thought for sure I had it open. Oh, yes, I do. It's getting late in the day. There you go. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait. There's the final picture.
All right.
Michael Jordan.
What's going on? Someone just scores a point. So I was kind of right. That's weird.
Yeah, this is, and it's an unbelievable photo because you got so much information. Let me get it all on the screen. Yeah, this is Michael Jordan's last shot as a Chicago Bull.
Oh no!
He played a few years with the Washington Wizards after this. If he retired here, this would have been his 6th championship. This is the famous crossover where he definitely commits a little bit of an offensive foul, pushing Russell out of the way. But they win the game 87-85. You can see the score up there.
Wow.
But anyway, let me, again, a great way of hooking kids in, because if you use this resource first, then obviously when you pivot to Mansa Musa and other historical lessons with contextualization, you can do the very same thing. And I love using this type of lesson with images. In fact, one of the most powerful ones is I do something very similar in my post-World War II class with that image of Ruby Freeman, being escorted into the school building. And, you just, you can pick anything. You can pick one of the agents or one of the federal marshals. You can pick her. And then as you're zooming out, the kids are like, what? And the teaching of the context comes from their questioning, because they want to know, why is this happening? Where are they? And it really is powerful. All right, so we are getting late in the evening. Let's do this one last breakout room, because we want you to see the feedback form that is the 3rd part of this type of lesson. We'll keep this one short. Again, let me pivot back to our slideshow here. So the feedback form will be in the link. And again, just kind of look at it as a resource or a tool. We'll do 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll come back. We'll talk about everything, kind of wrap it up all together. We have some kind of resources and some tips for you as we leave, and then we'll kind of wrap up in by 7:15. All right, so as we come back out of our breakout rooms, again, just a quick conversation about this final tool, this feedback form. Maybe a group that hasn't had a chance to contribute yet. How does this help us kind of tie everything back together?
In our breakout room, we were discussing an idea, and that is that I'm personally am not sure that, I mean, focusing on broad and narrow context is even feasible with our students, because I mean, to me, and the two teachers who are with me agreed on this, if I get any kind of contextualization out of my students, I'm happy. So, I mean, at this point, I don't care if it's broad or if it's narrow. I just want them to understand what contextualization means. And, you know, it's a struggle for them. I also wanted to ask everybody here, because I did the APSI course a couple of years ago, and our trainer used a book called Zoom, and I thought of that as you were showing us that image, and that actually is helpful to the students, because you can talk about how in history we zoom in or zoom out of events to depending on what we are looking for, what we're kind of trying to explain to our reader or to whoever we're talking to.
Yeah, Zoom is an excellent resource. I have a colleague who copied each individual page and laminated it. And what
That's
he
what we
does
did.
is, yeah, he mixes them up, puts them all over the floor, and he asks, you know, the students to kind of put them in order and figure out, and that begins his discussion on, you know, scale, contextualization, you know, zooming in, zooming out. It really is a great resource. Just to follow up, because I want to acknowledge like what you were talking about with your struggles with getting them to have any contextualization. One of the things that I have found is that you know, whether I use, for example, like the Mansa Musa lesson or not, like this type of, I just want to get back to like where the cards were. Oftentimes I can just replicate like this style of lesson, but seriously scaffold it for kids where, you know, this one has 16, what is it, 4x4 cards that can be broken up. You know, if kids are struggling, couldn't you have, you know, one or two or, you know, three where you determine what are, you know, maybe one broad and one narrow, and just start there and ask the kids to, you know, accurately place, you know, on the cone, you know, something just to, and then build from there, where every time you deal with contextualization, you're adding more events to really kind of show and scaffold the process. Do you think that would work? That one was for, I'm sorry, I didn't know who the last person was that spoke.
It was me. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Do you think that something like that could work?
It could. It could. I mean, there's no loss in trying. And in fact, I mean, over the years, I feel that, you know, each student group is different. So what might work for one group might not work for the other, and vice versa. So, I mean, I always try to vary my methods of teaching, and I try to tune into the idiosyncrasies of each class I teach. So, you know, what worked for me last year is definitely not working for me this year. And it's funny because it's the same school and they're all friends with each other and they all share the same background. But strangely enough, 1 year difference is making a huge difference. I can't figure it out, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, well, I can certainly empathize, and I don't know if I can figure it out either. Let me just
I
leave
do
a little
love that.
space. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do love that concept of continuing to add context as you're going through the lesson, though, where, you know, we shouldn't assume that we got all the context when we did the funnel activity at the beginning. As we continue through, we can continue to like find context and show kids that, or show our students that this is a growing thing, not a stagnant thing.
That's an excellent point. You know, as we were coming back from the breakout room, you know, I thought about the questions that are on the screen, and I hesitated with the first one. You know, what does it mean for a student to be proficient in contextualization? You know, I feel like I'm still working on becoming proficient on contextualization. I think it's one of the reasons why I like teaching history, is because I like studying history, and I consider myself a lead student first. And every time I read something and it provides more context for events that I found interesting, it's like, wow, I didn't know that. And it changes the way that you view different events in history. And as lifelong learners that we all are, as we chose this profession, we're constantly building our context, or building our subject knowledge. And it's our students, like you were saying, come every year with a different, and they're stagnant, because right, if you teach freshmen every year, the class will always be 14, and your knowledge is growing, and you can't understand why they don't understand the basics, right? Because sometimes you gotta think that you've been studying it for obviously a lot longer. We are like quarter past the hour, so let's start to get to the wrap up, and we'll call it a night. So we have just some tips for this. Like anything we do, modeling and using the tools as much as you can. The kids become more proficient in it the more you use it. I'll go back to the Alphonse analogy. If you introduce it in the beginning of the year and then you keep coming back to it, it just becomes a part of the classroom culture. The same thing here. The same thing, as you're using the cone, as you're using the different resources, and you're really and the kids are becoming more comfortable with it, then you can expand on the lessons and really add to it as you go. We wanted to give you a slice of some of the lessons and some of the activities, but within the units on OER, there's always supplemental videos and other resources that, again, can just be more material that can only add to it, to the lesson that you're trying to do. And OER is always providing resources for teachers to continue and engaging in the conversation. And in the community, in the OER community, we always have groups that will focus on contextualization and have subgroups where they're bouncing back and forth lesson ideas, materials that they use, talking about different lesson material, and things that they're practicing in the classroom. So if you were to go onto the OER community and isolate your specific subject matter that you want to teach, whether it be WHP or BHP, you'll find specific conversations about contextualization within that group. I will leave a little airspace here for any final questions. And Megan, as I have a couple screens up, and are there any questions that were in the chat that went unanswered as we get going? Or
I did not see any that didn't get answered.
all right. I will hang out for after the call if there's any specific questions, anything that you have on your mind. But other than that, it was nice meeting everyone virtually, and I hope to see you in the next session.